Everything is built on relationships. Everything.
We're Terry and Mary.
Business, built on relationships. Sales, built on relationships. Student organizations when you're in high school, college, built on relationships. Marriages, built on relationships, we hope.
And today we're talking to Dan Fail. Let's dive in.
Hi, friends. I was a speaker doing very surface level conversations for a while, telling funny stories. Again, like I said, telling funny stories and making an impact, but surface level impact. It's been about, I guess, almost 7 years now since I've been divorced. And so in the midst of my divorce, I reached out to a couple of friends that I knew they weren't going to trash talk my future ex, right? Like they weren't going to be oh yeah, but they just deserve it. And I can't believe they're treating you. I needed those friends who were going to push me, who were going to challenge me, who were going to say, is this really what you want? Why did this happen? What led you here? And so to really make me articulate that. And I would say that my friendships have grown exponentially better and deeper as a result of reaching out to people. And then, you take to Facebook and social media and you're like, I'm having a rough day, as opposed to look at how nice my food looks. And so look at how great my curated photo with filters is.
Yeah.
And so connecting authentically and sharing vulnerable stories, I realized that we often don't do that as human beings, and so to be vulnerable is to feel scary, but it doesn't have to be. And so finding ways to connect with student audiences or just audiences in general, I've found that, through that one, we'll call it a pain point, but I would say that my ex-wife and I co-parent like rock stars, right? I mean, we get along amazing and, it wasn't always that way, but I would say that the more that we communicate, the better that we've become. Same thing with people and audiences. The more that we can communicate and share about ourselves, then the more that we feel connected to each other. So I think that has been part of that impetus of, oh, wow, when you share, you connect on a better level. Well, when you connect on a better level, you're more curious about other people, and then your friendships become better. And so it almost this domino snowball effect of your relationships can become better as soon as you let people in. It's just kind of scary to let people in. Everyone assumes that I'm an extrovert, and while yes, I do enjoy being around people, I'm very much a solo. I need that downtime, and that social anxiety still sets in. In fact, if anything, it's almost been exacerbated by the whole global pandemic of can I shake your hand? Do I just elbow? I didn't realize how much I hugged people, and then I was like, oh, I should really is it cool to hug? Are we are we elbowing? Are we just fist bump? What's happening? And so that level of connection is going to look different. But I think it's also forced us to realize how connected we can be, but also how isolated we have been. And so that's an interesting mirror and reflection to kind of think about as how people have grown over the last, we'll call it 14, 15 months since COVID-19 hit and shut down everything. And it's a fascinating, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of different studies done, the impact of this on society for sure. I was an only child so I'm my mom's only son. I have 3 little brothers on my dad's side, and there's about a decade that separates me and the oldest little brother. I was an only child a lot growing up. And when you go from an only child after a decade, and all of a sudden, there's little brothers and almost one after another little brother. And it was where do I fit in anymore? And so the narrative that I told myself, not a correct narrative, but the narrative that I told myself was, well, dad's starting his new family. I don't fit in anymore. I want to go live with my mom. And wow. I did, right? I met with the judge, did all the stuff. And this is, my parents divorced when I was 3 months old. I had never seen my parents together. Okay. So I was I want to go live with my mom. And she lived, at the time around 3.5, 4 hours away. And so, and did that. So at 11 years old, moved in with my mom and spent 11 to 17 basically with my mom. So I think a lot of that, I was finally able to talk to my dad after 20 years or more about how I felt in that moment of this is what that felt like to a 10-year-old, to a 9, 10-year-old when this is happening. And finally just I guess kind of just getting it off my chest, but really he and I being able to process that. And I'm thankful that he and I had that and many other conversations around kind of like what we were feeling and what happened. And now my dad and I just planned a trip that's just me and him. Because I think he also realized that once the other three came along,
yes,
I moved on. I moved out, right? And I never went back home after college. After college, I moved to Indianapolis for a year, and then I went to graduate school in Northern California for 2 years, worked there for 2 years, and have never really lived back home for a truly extended amount of time. So
wow,
my dad and I have made a significant effort to hang out because, you know, I'm a decade older than the youngest one, so I'm 40. And so he and I are able to talk about things that my little brothers don't understand yet in terms of just the path of life. I would definitely say there was a lot of healing that happened,
yes,
and still happens. You know, I mean, to say that things are all roses and rainbows, I'd be full of crap. I mean, but there's an effort that's being made, right? And so for me to hear and be able to hear and listen to his perspective, as opposed to just hear him talk and be like, all right, cool, whatever, but to listen to him and his perspective, and for him to be curious and want to listen to my perspective, I think that has helped us a lot. And the fact that he might get upset from what I say, but he doesn't get angry in the moment and shut down.
yes,
Right. And so anger has never been his quick go-to reaction moment. And I think that really solidified too, is that when I raise my voice, I try to come back real quick and not, because anger does nobody any good.
wow.
Yeah. And I think that's also helped me in terms of just dealing with conflict. Do I get angry? Yeah. Like I'll get upset, but I never like Hulk rage out, like, you don't want to see me angry, right? Like I'm never that way. I might go from like green to red real quick, but I rein it back in. And I think a lot of that just has to do with him modeling the way of, he might get frustrated, he might get angry, but it's never been a violent, it's never been a significant raised voice, any of that. So I think that left an impact for me. I tended to be that, I think, sort of like a mediator of like, hey, let's just laugh and then we can move on. And so, yeah, it's helpful to come to any situation with a calm demeanor, if at all possible. And I think, you know, as human beings, it's easier for us to let the emotions take control. I also think it's healthy for us to express emotions. So like if my kids are upset, like I let them yell it out. In fact, I was with my son in the car, this was maybe a couple weeks ago, and he was super like just frustrated and I couldn't get it out of him. You know, I was just like, tell me what's wrong. And he's 9. And I could just tell that it was like bent up. Like you could see the tension in him. And I was like, you know what? There are times where I get super frustrated and I just need to yell. And I need to yell as loud as I can, but I do it in my car so that people don't think that like, you know, whatever, that I'm just like alone in my apartment yelling. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to plug my ears. And I just want you to yell as loud as you can. And I was like, as loud and as long as you can. And he was like, are you sure? I was like, yep. So I, plugged my ears, and I could like hear him a little bit yell. Yeah. And so then, just in an effort to diffuse the situation, I'm like, did you finish? Like, let me know when you're done. Like, whenever you're ready to start, go ahead. Go. Are you going to yell at all? Like, what's the deal? And so it made him kind of like laugh it out, to be like, okay, I've had that big release. I'm able to laugh about it now. And he's like, yes, I yelled. Like, Dad, I yelled. And so then I'm like, great, let's turn on some music and let's go drive. So I think just finding those times to let the emotions out is fine. It's when we bottle them up that's when, we've got much bigger fish to fry. If you're not having good conversations with people that you consider friends, if you're not getting to deeper levels. Now, I'm not saying like, I would not go up to Mary for the first time meeting her and be like, hi, Mary, I'm Dan. What's your biggest fear in life? You don't get to that point right away. It takes some time to build up to. And so knowing that that's a way that, like there's a spectrum of conversations that happens. And so knowing that it's okay to start from like an awkward conversation or start for some of that, because that's how you build rapport. Rapport builds the relationship. Relationship builds the foundation of whatever comes next, whether that's a sales thing, an intimate relationship, a partnership, like whatever that is, you've got to be able to communicate what's on your mind. Because if I'm a business partner with someone right now. We've launched a master class on how to teach people to speak for college campuses and get paid for it. And so she and I are in like a partnership at that point. And so there was like, well, percentage this, percentage that. And it was like, oh, we'll figure it out later. And then at one point we were like, no, we like, let's just, and we've known of each other for the better part of a decade. And so it was like, no, let's just put it in paper. Let's put it in writing. She was like, I want you to do this. She was like, and I want like next to nothing. She was like, I don't want you to feel bad about it. She was like, I want you to feel like this is a partnership in the conversation. And having that freedom of like, okay, well, here's how I'm feeling. How are you feeling about this? And where are we? And so building on that is a good thing. And so arguing, but in a productive way to where it's not just arguing to win. I would rather argue to get my point heard, and then let's talk about the points or how we're coming at things. Because maybe they're missing each other completely. And that's taken time to grow into, because I've got former staff members that will tell you, I love to debate for debate's sake. And they're right. That being said, there were times in staff meetings that me and one of my supervisees, we were literally arguing the same point. We were using two different methods, but the same exact outcome. We both knew it. We both acknowledged it at the onset, and then we argued about it. And then the other staff member was like, this makes me uncomfortable. And it's like, oh, because our style is in essence to debate the same point to make sure that both points of view are heard. But that works in one way. That's not going to work with every relationship.
Yes.
And so knowing that every relationship is a little bit different, whether you supervise someone, whether you're reporting to someone, whether that's a significant other or not that you're reporting to, like whatever that is, those conversations have to happen. My spouse emeritus, as she would like to be called as opposed to ex-wife, she also comes from divorced parents. And so, and has an older brother. They're somewhat estranged. And so, for me during my divorce, I knew that I wanted the kids to know that they had two parents that loved them very much, and that there were two people who were really invested in them and wanted to be present. I've made a much more concerted effort in the last, I think, 4 or 5 years to be a very physically present, mentally present, emotionally present dad that's invested in their extracurriculars. I mean, like, again, I said I know nothing about sports. I was a referee for soccer because they needed extra like referees. Bad idea. I was a co-coach for her softball team. Bad idea. Did they learn any skills that year? No. But was I there? Yes, because I had a flexible schedule as a speaker to be there. In terms of like the blended family, like my dad will try to get us all together. We did a beach trip last year, and to say that it went well I'd be lying. There was some rough times. I would say that my kids absolutely adore my oldest brother and his wife. The oldest little brother and his wife, and they live out in Portland right now. And so, my ex and I joked about just doing a road trip up to Portland to see them and maybe coming back or doing stuff. But I think it's just a matter of, in any family, there's different dynamics that happen. And so exploring those and really saying like, hey, look, we're not going to come on a beach trip again if we're all under one house. That's just 13 people under one house with all the significant others, and too much for a week. We'll go down the street and get our own hotel room or whatever. Like we'll rent the house 4 doors down or something like that. Like we've decided, my ex-wife and I were like, it's not going to happen again. Because the youngest is 21, something like that. So like, I remember how I was when I was that age, and I was not of the like, I'm going to spend a week with my family, right? Like that. So it's just a matter of perspective, I guess.
Right.
That we'll work through it all. I've said my piece to both my dad and my stepmom. He lives in Tennessee, and so we flew to Vegas to meet. And he helped me with my LLC paperwork. We spent a couple days together. We like just doing that type of stuff and bonding. And so, yeah, I mean, like just some of that has been helpful. His birthday is just a couple days after Christmas. And so I always was like, the cheap son that was like, we're just going to combine both gifts. I'll get a better gift, but I'll just combine both gifts. Well, one year I did well speak. I was having a great year speaking, and still had a full-time job. And so I had good income. And so for his birthday and Christmas gift for 2 years, I basically, the first year I gave him a card and said, you, me, Oktoberfest, my treat. And so I flew us to Munich to do Oktoberfest. He went to high school in Germany. So it was this great, like, we spent a week there. And honestly, like, he and I still talk. One of my favorite photos of me and him is the first beer that we had in a beer garden in Oktoberfest, like at Oktoberfest in Munich. And that's just, we still talk about it to this day. And that was probably 5 years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I think now. And it's those moments that we continue to, I think, not chase, but we continue to like talk about and want more of. So much so that he and I have already planned a new trip. We're going to meet back in Vegas in like 3 weeks. I was never told as a kid, suck it up, right? Of like, I was like, I think that I was told, I mean, my memory's not that great, but like, I think I was told, like my dad was never closed off with his emotions by any means. And so, but we also weren't like a big sports family or anything like that. So ESPN was never on in my home, right? And I'm of the opinion that ESPN is just the same show on repeat for every 30 minutes. But that's a whole different...
That's a different discussion.
Yeah, it's a whole different discussion. So I think on my end, my upbringing, I come from divorced parents, and so that they could tolerate each other in public, but one of the only pictures that I have of them are from when I graduated high school, when I graduated college, and when I graduated from my master's program. That's like the few photos that I have of the three of us together. And so I think, even in the midst of my own divorce and where I've come now is that I want to make sure that my kids know that they've got parents that love them. They just don't live together and they're not married anymore. Yeah. And so knowing that, whatever the past experience is and has been, like, and I tell my kids, I mean, every time I see them, like, hey, love you, how was your day? And try to have good conversations for what that looks like. And I think my upbringing really came from, I was a latchkey kid. So I home at 3 o'clock until the parents got home at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and always did my homework. And so I was always kind of self-sufficient. But knowing that, like, when you are able to play with friends and when you're able to connect, that's where I felt more me, as opposed to, I'm just going to play with my He-Man figures in my room, and that's kind of it. And then I'd say a lot of it too is that when you grow up in I'm not athletic at all, right? Like, I don't run unless I'm being chased, okay? And even then, like in a zombie apocalypse, I'm first eaten, right? Like, I am what's called a snack when that happens. Yeah. And so,
he and I can relate to that.
Like, I enjoy a little bit more like going to a gym and working out for my own health. But I think a lot of it too is when you're not a sports kid and when you're a male in the South, there's not a lot of connections that are made. And so those friendships, we're okay, but I don't really talk to a lot of people from middle school, high school, college. And that's at some fault of mine and some fault of just people grow. And I think finding ways to connect with people, finding ways to do that, I think that kind of shaped it as well for me, is that you didn't have like the core group of people on a team together, right? Like, I tried out for my track team and they were like, maybe you should just do the statistics for us.
Oh my God.
Not that it scarred me, it's totally scarred me. But I'm not athletic. So finding that like group of guys, you didn't have that like group of dudes. And I think that's also shaped me for, like, I'm okay being more vulnerable. I don't have to front, because when you grow up in the South, like, it's almost expected that you have to put up a front. Yeah. And that's not healthy for anyone, especially if you're trying to figure out who the heck you are, much less connecting with people to know who you are. Coaching is something that I wish that I'd started to do earlier. And I think working in higher education for 15 years, inadvertently, you become a life coach to a lot of students, right? They come, they vent their problems to you, and you're like, well, what about this? Or what about this? Or have you thought about, or do you need me to show up and just listen? One of my closest friends literally will ask me as we get on the phone, I'm like, hey, I'm going through some stuff. I need to process. One of his first questions is, how do you need me to show up? Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to be the friend that's like offering you advice? Do you need me to be the coach that's going to be like, get off your ass? Like, how do you need me to show up for you?
Your friend says that to you?
Yeah, that's the most powerful way to start. How do I need to show up right now? And knowing that, I think, has helped me reframe how I talk to people, rather than just, I'm always like a solutions person.
Yeah.
But there's power in silence. And even in a keynote, building that, there's power in silence. So how do you make people stop, reflect? Because you can humor them and then you can like get them really good. But how do you craft that experience to do that? And I think part of lighting up as a coach, how I light up, is brainstorming ways to get people to see themselves. And also, and I'm sure that you're aware through just various life experiences, we get in our own way a lot. Like,
Yes.
our own negative self-talk is a big, big problem. I mean, I have a Post-it note. I hope it's okay to show for everyone. Here, I'll cover up the middle finger. But I have a Post-it note of like, I call it my little negative Jiminy Cricket. And so, right, because I think that, and he's flipping people off, but my negative Jiminy Cricket is the one that's like, oh, you're not ready for this, or you're like, why are you doing this? You're not qualified, or whatever. And I think there's times where we will always hear that. I think you will always hear that negative voice.
Yeah.
And when you're coaching people, it's okay to acknowledge the voice, but just don't listen to it.
Yeah.
Like, you can hear it and be like, all right, cool. Like, just brush it off, like get rid of it, like Marie Kondo that out of your life. Like, this no longer brings me joy, goodbye, or whatever. I think finding those opportunities is really good, because we get in our own way a lot more than anyone else will. And so once we move past that, which comes to the vulnerability of storytelling, once you get over the like, well, my story's not good enough, there's power in your story, regardless of which story you choose. I could literally tell you the story of my first kiss and how embarrassing that was, and we could have this great concept. But if I haven't found a way to relate it, then it's just a funny story.
Yes.
Right. And so finding ways to make that relatable for whatever audience that you're with can be very powerful. And that's the coaching part that I just really enjoy.
You are wonderful.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for making time for this.